Here we are, and we are ready to start sculpting our self-portrait in Mudbox. A couple of things. I would like to just kind of quickly go through the interface. Now, there's lots of tutorials out there, and even Autodesk help will take you to any kind of Mudbox help that you'll need, especially with the interface. But just quickly, at the top here we have our default menu selection here and our default 3D view. I went through this quickly earlier where I showed that what our UVs look like. It's not what our UVs look like because we have the image plane. We need to select self-portrait mesh, then we'll see what our UVs look like. We have an image browser, so if we have any images that we want to bring in for stamps or stencils to paint, we can do so here. And our third tab here is the Mudbox community. I love this because if you're connected to the internet, which hopefully you are, you'll be able to kind of go directly into the Mudbox website and look at a lifelike portrait. So I encourage you to kind of go through this tutorial, and I'll mention this a bit as well, but it gives a lot of great resources that I might not cover here just because my is more of a general view. This tutorial will help you maybe with some more other details that you might not have seen here. Okay, I'm just going to click off of this for a moment, if it'll let me. Just click. Oh, I have my self-portrait mesh locked. I need to unlock it if I want to paint on it. But I'll just click out of there, and I should see that I'm still in my mesh here to sculpt. I already mentioned a little bit here to the right side of our interface. We have, much like the channel box or attribute editor in Maya, we have layers, and this default layer mode is either by default will be in sculpt. Click here and I'll be in my paint layers mode. So we sculpt in layers and we paint in layers, and I'll deal with that in later tutorials. We already had a quick look at our object list, and the object list is much like our outliner window in Maya. It just lists everything that's in our object. Here we have our mesh icons. These little sphere icons are our materials, our light, and our cameras. Viewport filters are basically just to help in our viewport to get different sense of how things will look. We can add tone, we can see what our normal map looks like, screen distance, our ambient oculation, cavity oculation, and these things will turn on later when we get more detail into sculpting. On the bottom horizontal panel, we are in our sculpt tools, and beside our sculpt tools here we have our different sculpt brushes and profiles, and I'll try and cover those once we start sculpting. The next tab over is paint, and we have our different paint brushes. When we click on our paint brushes, we have options that come below here to the right in our we should see in our layers list the different brush options that we have available to us and the properties that we can adjust associated with those brushes. To the right of our tool set, sorry, before I go there, we have curve tools used in conjunction for other things, including helping with topology and edge flow. We have pose tools. You can go back, if you have a character, you can pose that character. And we have our select and move tools. We're not really, all we're really going to be concerned with is sculpting and painting. And to the right of this panel we have our stamp, and this is just basically a series of images or default images in our library that we can use as stamps to paint with. Stencils, the same thing. We can stencil paint. The difference is stamp will actually deform geometry, while stencil is more about painting texture on top of the surface, not actually deforming the surface. Fall off is a nice little tab option that will allow us to determine the fall off properties of the brushes that we're using, whether they're sculpting or paint tools. Material presets, this is great. Instead of this gray, I can try and look at, my mesh is selected, I can look at selecting some of the default materials here to paint with. This default kind of beige color is nice, but I can look at other properties as well. I think just the default is what we'll work with for now. I have lighting presets I'm not going to worry about right now, but I can adjust my lighting. So if I click on a lighting presets, as a section will remove all existing lighting, cannot be undone. I'm going to hit OK. So we get just a different kind of lighting. And a camera bookmark, which we're not going to concern with. One other thing is, everyone's probably wondering, how did I get to see this wireframe of our mesh? And it's just a simple hotkey of W. W turns it on and W turns it off. So I have it on and I'm able to see the topology and edge flow of my mesh. Let's go back to our sculpt layer here and let's just start sculpting. I'm going to use this smooth tool. When I click on my smooth tool, I should see a little hint of a brush, and it's just like Maya. I hold my B key down to increase that size and I can start smoothing out that brush. I'm going to undo that because I want my brush to be mirrored. When I click on that brush to the right here, I have mirror off. I'm going to turn that on to X. So now when I smooth out, it should smooth both sides. I can use my sculpt tool and just see what that does. Sculpts a big jaw. With that sculpt tool still selected, I'm just going to take the strength down to 0.5. The size I'm not worried about because I determine that myself interactively by holding the B key down. But the fall off of this brush, I want it to be soft, so I'm going to try just doing a nice, I'll try this, see how this does. So maybe that's too soft. Let's try this one. And I'm just trying to sculpt out my jawline a bit better here. I have this wrinkle coming down from my face, so let's try and make this a bit more apparent. Take the brush size up just a bit. Take my smooth key and I'm going to try and smooth the corner of my mouth down. Maybe smooth some of this down a bit. You can see it starts to get a little crackly there, and when we start to see that, we may need to do something, and that something is increase the amount of geometry we have. And I've got this sculpt layer here, and if I turn that off, it turns the geometry off. What I should have mentioned before is that we can sculpt this as layers, and what I should have done is just added a new layer. So now with this layer selected, I can go back and I could smooth some of this out a bit. And you can see if with that layer I can turn it on and off just to see how that's affected our sculpting. You see here that this L sign here, it means level. I'm at level 0. That's the kind of base mesh topology that I exported. What I want to do is add a new subdivision level. That level here goes from level 0 to level 1. And to get to that next or higher subdivision level, that is, it's going to divide each of these faces in half, I'm going to go Shift D. Now you can see how I have much more geometry to work with, And now if I start to sculpt, and smooth, that it's not going to let me because I started sculpting at level 1. It says you cannot sculpt, you need a new layer, so let's add a new layer. You can see I get this no sculpting layer because I'm at level 2. I know I'm at level 2 because it says sculpt layer 2, and once I sculpt or hit this smooth tool, it's telling me I'm at level 1. So let's just try and smooth some of this out. Now I probably will have to go up a few more layers here to smooth this out, but at least I can start getting some of this geometry right. I'll allow you to kind of go and explore the brushes, but there's the grab brush, and the grab is just more or less allows me to take a layer and just kind of pull geometry out, which is handy. There's the pinch, which will kind of crease together. Let me get a bit of a harder edge here. I can turn the strength up a bit, and that'll pinch edges together to get me that kind of hard edge that I was looking for. I'll do that here. Flatten is great. Flatten will kind of flatten out those areas for me, so I can turn the strength up and just flatten out and give some detail to areas like lips. And the foamy brush will allow me to kind of, it's like kind of adding geometry on top. That's a little insane, but I can just take that strength down. And I can add a bit of definition here. It's like kind of plastering detail on top. I can start getting that detail of those wrinkles that I want. And you can see just by turning that layer off the difference that makes. What about our ears? Using this foamy brush I can really start sculpting some ears. I'll go back to my object list, to our perspective, that image plane, and I can change that image to my side view, and I can sculpt my ear detail. Turn mirroring off and back on here for a minute. can see we get some very powerful tools here to sculpt. And I've already gotten to a layer where I can't really do much more because I still need more geometry. I think before I do that though, I'd like to maybe flatten some areas and work on my eyes. That just goes back to my image plane and change that to front. I'm going to use my sculpt tool. If I hold my control key down, it does a push instead of a pull. Try sculpting some brow. And try smoothing that out. You can see you get some tearing here. It's a good indication that we need to subdivide another layer here. You can just see the difference that's making in our face. I'm going to hit Shift D to go up another layer. And I'm at level 2, and you're going to ask, how many levels can I go? Well, you can go, I think, up to like level 7, but really you don't want to go past level 4. You get anything past level 3 or 4 and it's really going to kind of knock out your computer and you'll just end up crashing. So I like to try and keep everything under around 3 or 4 maximum. So I'm going to need a new layer because I can't sculpt on level 1 anymore. So I'm at layer 3 and I'm just going to try using that foam brush just to add a bit of detail here. This wax brush is nice that it tries to kind of fill in between cracks or these ridges here. I'm at a subdivision level where I'm able to smooth out some of this area here. You can see by using that foamy tool to add geometry, and then smoothing will take it down back to kind of its original size. So you can see where we started if I turn these layers off. You can really start to get some cool stuff happening. That's sculpt. I'll continue sculpt in the second part.